Don't tell anyone. You can get painterly and sophisticated effects using very beginner watercolor painting techniques. I didn't even know that until I painted this fox. You see, I am a naughty teacher, and most of my tutorials end up being pretty complicated and advanced, showing in detail how I paint my nationally award-winning paintings. So they do make for interesting watching, but they may be a bit complicated if you haven't been painting for a few years. I'm always trying to make more beginner-oriented tutorials, but so often I get lost in the process and forget to keep things simple. But for this fox painting, I was determined to keep it simple so my more beginner-oriented members could follow along. I resigned myself to the thought that this would not come out as dreamy, loose, and painterly as my usual work, and that was okay. But folks, this painting surprised me. Despite the fact that I used simple techniques, I was still able to get this much more painterly than I thought possible with such a simple approach. So I learned a lot from this painting too. So in today's tutorial, I'm going to share the best secrets this so-called beginner tutorial revealed to me. I wasn't expecting it, but I was so thrilled by these gorgeous effects. And by the way, I can't wait to try more paintings with this approach. I think the best way to show you how this painting revealed these secrets to me is to just show you the footage from start to finish. In the interest of time, I've sped up the footage by about 500x, and I'll explain the highlights of how I achieved this very wet and wet looking painting using mostly very simple wet on dry techniques. And remember, if you want to watch this in real time, ad-free, and also get the line drawing reference photo, which by the way is by John Thorne on Pexels.com, be sure to join my Patreon. This tutorial will be available for a limited time on my $8 tier before I move it to my $13 highly edited tier, which I call that tier the highly edited tier because those tutorials have a lot of beginner-oriented information and explanation, including in-depth discussion of supplies, paint colors, and techniques. So those tutorials are created with a lot of extra supportive explanation and demonstrations, keeping my beginners in mind. When you join, you'll also get instant access to my library of over 100 tutorials. However, of course, if you're not ready to join a paid tier, I do hope you'll at least join my Patreon for free, because when you join for free, you can keep up with my art adventures, be notified of my new free content, which is a lot. I put a lot of good tips in my free content, and once in a while, I even share other watercolor goodies with my free members. You can also join my Facebook group for free, where you can upload your own paintings, and if you ask for it, get feedback about how to make your paintings stronger, or get ideas on how to proceed with a painting you've started. Okay, let's dive into this footage, and I'll share all my best tips for how I painted this fox with mostly wet on dry, simple techniques. Here we go. All right, I did this painting on cold press. Cold press is a lot more beginner friendly. And here is probably one of my number one tips for success, other than using good 100% cotton cold press paper, is this brush. This is not a special brush. You can use any brush that is a bamboo calligraphy brush. There's very cheap ones on Amazon, Dick Blick, anywhere. And what I do is I splay the bristles, I pick up some tea consistency paint, I blot the brush, and then I use kind of a dry brush technique, and it gives really dry brush effects. And it's a great way to get really controlled effects with a wet on dry technique. And then what you see me doing here is we're already on layer number 2. So what you have to do is you paint a layer, let it completely dry, and then you can paint another layer on top of that with really dry brush, swishy brush strokes, and it'll give you really nice but complicated looking textured fur effects. Now, if you're not painting fur, you can do this on trees. You could use this layering technique of using layers of tea consistency, very watery paint, one on top of the other to build up values, to build up colors, and to build up texture. So that is my first secret, is at least for textured areas, use these calligraphy brushes that you can splay the bristles and use like dry brush techniques for really cool texture. If you're painting fur, or the same exact techniques you use for fur, are the ones that you use for more botanical elements like grass or the canopy of trees is what I'm trying to say. All right, let me tell you the colors I'm using too here. I'm using my new favorite mix of Pyrrole Transparent Orange by Daniel Smith. Love this color. I did a whole tutorial on it a couple weeks ago, so be sure to check that out. But I mixed this Pyrrole Transparent Orange with either cobalt blue or ultramarine blue, and I get these grays. So this is my new favorite mix. I used to love burnt sienna and blue, but now I like Pyrrole because with the Pyrrole Transparent Orange, I can get brighter oranges. But the main lesson I want you to learn here is that you can paint these wet on dry effects, and then you clean out your brush, you blot it, so then you just have a damp, clean brush. And I just did that in the ear here. We are going really fast, but I'm doing that in the eye too. I'm blending with a damp brush. We call that in the watercolor world a thirsty brush, which you can use to soak up mistakes that are still wet. And you can also use a thirsty brush, a damp brush, to blend and get soft edges when you paint wet on dry. Because when you paint wet on dry, and this is the secret to this dreamy look that I achieved using wet on dry effects, I painted a wet and dry mark, then I clean out my brush, blot it, and then it's still damp, and I can use that on my still damp paint and blend these hard edges. So blending out hard edges and getting a lot of soft edges is the secret to making things look more painterly, more dreamy. It just makes it look more advanced. And I did that a lot in the ear area. And you can see how I did that also in the eye area because I used my eye formula painting trick, which I've made a video about that, demonstrating it on a cat eye, but it works on cat eyes, fox eyes, human eyes, which is the top third of the eye, I get really dark. The middle third of the iris, I get medium color, or the actual color of the thing, the local color, which for this fox is like an orange brown. And it's a medium value. And then the bottom third of the iris is light in color. And the way that I do that with wet on dry techniques is I paint a layer. I use a damp brush to blend the bottom edge of the hard edge and let it dry and repeat until you get all the values in your eye. So one of the secrets to getting these dreamy effects, and there's quite a few more secrets coming throughout this video, but the first one is to use a damp brush to blend hard edges. The less hard edges you have in your work, the more dreamy it's going to look. And here I actually got the fur on the chest wet first with a dry brush, but I used clean, clear water in a dry brush effect. And then I charged in. That's called charging when you drop color into a pre-wetted area. And that's cobalt blue and permanent green light that I painted the shadows of the chest in. And that's another secret for you guys, is in the shadows, that's a place where you can play with color. In photographs, shadows look gray, but in real life, there's more color in shadows. And in painting, you can make them even more colorful than they look in the reference photo. So that's another trick, an easy way to make your paintings look more sophisticated and interesting. And that is to add more colors to your shadows than you would think possible from the reference photo. And so now I'm doing some negative painting with dry brush around the outside of the fox. And I'm splaying my bristles and painting in a fast swishy motion right up to the edge of the fox. And I'm getting these really great, interesting edges. And that is another trick to making your paintings look more interesting, where you have a really light area like the white edge of the fox abutting a darker area. Make sure those edges are interesting. And here is secret number, I'm not sure what it is now, number 3 maybe, and that is, while your paint is still a little damp, to make it dreamy, After you've used wet and dry techniques, you splat it with clean, clear water. And I did that a lot in the background. And that's what gave me all these pretty little dreamy looking cauliflower effects. So you can do that even with wet on dry techniques by painting wet on dry and letting it set up a little but not dry completely, and then splatting into it. And it will make some interesting cauliflowers. And I demonstrated that more in depth on a free upload that I did a week or two ago. So you can go watch my watercolor exercises that I suggested for everyone, and you can see how I paint wet on dry, let it set up, and then I splat into it, and it makes these most beautiful, dreamy, cauliflowered effects like you see happening in the background here. But I could have done it in the fur too. And then another secret of getting really dreamy effects without getting too complicated in the technique is actually in your design. And I have another free, more in-depth tutorial about this, so you can watch more in depth, because we're packing a lot into this tutorial here, which I do always try to do. And that is, use the strength of your design to make your painting more sophisticated. And what I did in this painting is I used Rembrandt edges. So for example, look at the ear. I have a disappearing edge on the ear. That is a light on light edge, which there is a windmill principle I talked about, coined by James Gurney, where you want to get 4 different pairings between the main subject and your background. You want a light subject on light background, dark subject on light background, dark subject on dark background, and you want those 4 pairings. So in the ear, I have a light on light pairing. I have a dark ear tip on light background. I have a light chest on light background of this fox. So that is a design element, not a technique, that can make your paintings look more sophisticated. So it's very simple to do that if you know the trick. Doesn't take really complicated techniques. It just takes knowing how to design your painting. And then I splash on some white ink for some final snow effects. That's the jewelry. I call that adding the jewelry. I have another free video about adding jewelry, making sure you add a little bit, not too much, a little jewelry at the end of your painting process to really make your painting seem a lot more sophisticated and finished than maybe your skills would allow. So I have a whole tutorial about that that's free. And so it doesn't take complicated techniques to paint a more complicated looking painting if you know some of these tricks. So I hope that gave you a little taste, at least, of some of the things that you can do to make your paintings look more sophisticated, more painterly, even when you use the simplest of techniques. And it's funny because I'm always hearing from my viewers, we want to know advanced techniques. Well, what would really make your paintings look more advanced is not advanced techniques, but more advanced knowledge of how to make a painting look really sophisticated. And a lot of it's through really strong design. So I won't go on too long on my soapbox, but I'm always telling my members, be sure to watch the last session of the painting tutorial, which most people tune out. They think they get to the ugly stage and they think they've lost their painting, when really what they need to do is add jewelry, pull the painting together, balance out the values. You've not lost control of your painting. You just need to keep going. So I talk and demonstrate that a lot in my tutorials as well. And I've noticed that some painters, a lot of tutorials don't show that part because it's a little more tedious and time consuming. But to me, it's so important. If I don't teach you that, I'm not doing my job. So anyway, you get a lot of that in my full-length real-time tutorials. Obviously, if you watch this fox in real time, I can explain so much more about these techniques of how I got this dreamy outcome. So I hope you will join me on Patreon. And at the very least, join for free, join my Facebook group for free. And I hope to see you online. And I love to hear from you guys. So leave me a comment. And until next time, go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.